Today I saw a video from the excellent Phil's Computer Lab where I saw on the thumbnail that he was installing Windows 98 from a USB CD-ROM drive. Now this is actually a video that I had wanted to make at one point in the past and never quite got around to because I had discovered a method of installing Windows 98 from a USB drive. So when I watched Phil's video, I was expecting to see a process similar to the one that I had used several years ago. However, while I was not familiar with the method in Phil's video, and it was an excellent video as always from Phil, the method he described still requires a machine that has a BIOS that supports booting from USB. He even makes specific mention in his video that
MS-DOS does not support USB optical drives.
That's actually not quite true. There is a way to get DOS to recognize a USB CD-ROM drive, and as such, we are actually going to be able to install Windows 98 via a USB CD-ROM drive from a DOS boot floppy, and I'm going to show you how. As far as actually installing Windows itself, that was a result of this machine, my Pentium 233MMX laptop from 1997. This machine is pre-USB 1.0. It's actually the draft spec from 1997. So the BIOS has essentially no native support for USB whatsoever. It does not offer USB legacy support for keyboards and mice. Definitely doesn't boot from USB. When I got this thing, I started installing Windows from the CD, and the CD-ROM drive failed midway through the installation. But luckily, using a floppy drive, a DOS boot disk with the correct drivers loaded on it, I was able to insert a USB flash drive, which contained the Windows 98 ISO file on it. Then using the excellent SUCD package, I was able to mount the ISO drive as a virtual drive in DOS. All of that made possible with the USB ASPI drivers, which made the USB disk visible. Now, like I said, I used a flash drive in that instance, but I did find later that USB CD-ROM drives do work. In fact, USB floppy drives also work. Just about any device that conforms to the USB generic mass storage class is going to work. Not always. The software can be somewhat picky. It'll vary depending on your make and model of flash drive and CD drive, as well as the USB controller in your old hardware. I found compatibility to be pretty good. My IBM, which is actually a TIAC USB floppy drive, works, as well as this Asus USB CD-ROM drive. Now today I'm not going to use that laptop. I'm actually going to use this here, my big beautiful beige boy. It's a Dimension 4100, a Dell from 2000. This one is running a Pentium 3 1 gigahertz, maxed out at 512 megabytes of RAM. But the important thing is that one, the USB ports are much easier to reach on this thing than on the laptop. Two, it's already hooked up to my monitor and my capture card. And three, it does not support native USB booting of any variety. So we are going to boot from the floppy disk and use our files on the floppy to install Windows 98. I have verified that you can do this from a CD-ROM drive, and since that was the topic of Phil's video, I'm going to go ahead and do this whole thing using only a floppy drive and a USB CD-ROM drive. This is made possible, like I said, with the USB ASPI drivers. Now, as this excellent Retro Bytes video covers, the USB standard adopted the SCSI drive control protocols for generic drive types such as floppy drives, hard drives, CD drives, etc. We are actually going to make use of that. We're going to use these ASPI drivers, which is a Adaptec SCSI interface protocol, which lets us use some modified drivers that are provided online to let DOS talk to a USB CD-ROM drive as if it were a SCSI drive. This will let us copy the Windows installation files onto our hard drive and go from there. Now I have these utilities and some other stuff collected here in what I call LCARs, which is my custom utility disk. I've got that published to GitHub in case people want to download it and use it. It kind of feels like cheating in this video because I designed this floppy specifically for this task. So I am not going to use it here. I will do a separate video covering what all is included in this disk and what you can do with it. But for now, I'm just going to use it as a reference because I don't remember exactly verbatim how to set up config.sys, and I'm going to use this to refresh my memory. The important things that we need here are these DOS USB files that are provided here, but are also available for download from various places that I will link to in the description. I learned this method in part from this excellent blog post that describes how to do things, and downloaded the driver files from this old DOS utilities download page. There is some more information available here from HDD Guru and here on jumpjet.info, which provides the actual README file for the driver itself. On boot, it will scan for any USB mass storage devices. However, we actually will need one of two other driver files. We will need, beyond USB ASCII, we will need USB CD, such as one of these. Now, I have used the Panasonic one just across the board, and it has worked just fine. I've never actually tried the Asus Tech driver, despite the fact that I'm using an Asus CD drive. They seem to be fairly generic. Luckily, once something is USB compliant, it tends to be USB compliant. So these are the three files we need. Well, we don't technically need DI-1000. That is for flash drives, not CD drives, but we will need USB ASCII and USB CD. We also will actually need mscdex.exe. To make things a little easier, and because this happens to be what I have sitting around on my computer, we are actually just going to go ahead and use a Windows 95 boot disk because I have it. Don't remember where I put it. Here we go. But if we see here, the important thing is that the Windows 95 or Windows 98 boot disks will include CD-ROM support, including mscdex.exe. If you create a fresh boot disk by running format a/s or sys or whatever the command is, if you do it by making just a boot disk the standard way on an existing DOS machine, you will need to make sure that you have our DOS USB files, USB CD.sys and USB ASCII.sys, as well as mscdex. Those are actually the only files you'll need. However, I do like using this Windows 95, and I think the Windows 98 boot disk is probably about the same, as it gives us the CD driver mscdex already. It has edit.com and fdisk and format and everything else we need to format and partition a hard drive for Windows installation. So I'm going to use this one. Take the aforementioned advice if you're doing it a different way. I'm going to go ahead and put the freshly formatted SD card into my SD to IDE reader on the machine. And we are going to go ahead and boot it up. So I'm going to show you here in the BIOS that I am not cheating. I've said that before, but here we go. 1 gigahertz Pentium 3, 512 megs. Let's look at our boot configuration here. Nothing to speak of as far as USB booting or access. All this stuff is normal. Legacy USB support. I actually have never gotten to work on this machine. It doesn't seem to emulate PS2 USB keyboards, but I'll go ahead and turn this off just because. In our IDE configuration here, we can see I've got my IDE to SD card here. Nothing else on that bus. This is what's set to boot. I've got my 2 optical drives. Diskette is enabled. None of this stuff matters. None of that matters. We're going to go ahead and disable that because that was going a little too fast. But here we can see that there are no USB boot options on this machine. If I go here, there are no USB drives listed anywhere. I did at one point think perhaps that these ARMD drives were USB, but those are actually my PCI RAID controller. The option ROM allows the BIOS to scan those for bootable drives. There are no bootable drives currently connected to that RAID controller. So it will search all of these and it will not find anything to boot from. So let's go ahead and prove that. Exit saving changes. This does take forever, actually. RAID controller. Post beep. Starting Windows 95. It is booting from the floppy. I can hear it churning. So, I have actually already done the edits on this drive. I forgot about that. But here, I will go ahead and show you what needs to be done. So we go ahead and do no CD-ROM support. And we are going to go ahead and do edit config.sys. And just to make things consistent, and because this is already set up this way, we're going to go ahead and add an extra menu item. If you're not using the Windows 95 CD or floppy and you are just using a standard DOS disk, then just add these instructions that I'm going to add to the end of the file. Should be fine. Hopefully you understand a little bit about DOS drivers in config.sys. If not, there are lots of guides online. Sorry, that's not quite entirely what this video is about, but hopefully you can get there. So we go ahead and add our menu item for USB CD support. We come down here and define a new configuration for USB CD. We are more or less just going to simulate the adaptec entry above. We want himem.sys included. Don't forget about that. And we're going to do device USB ASCII.sys. The V flag is just for verbose. This is going to list the output for us while it's booting. Gives us a better idea of whether or not things are working. And then we are going to do our device USB CD.sys using that standard MSCD001 ID that all the other ones do. That means that we don't actually have to edit our auto exec on this one because MSCDEX will automatically be looking for the drive to be there. However, we will go ahead and verify that our auto exec is set up correctly. And here we go. mscdex.exe/d mscd001. This means that as long as this line is here, and if it's not there on your auto exec, go ahead and add it. Not this line above, just this one here, LH space A. You could technically use, I think, just load if you don't have high memory access available. I guess that seems an unlikely situation. Maybe I will do some testing on that later. But regardless, you need the MSCDEX driver here to look for that device. And that is all we need with auto exec. Save that. Go ahead and exit. And we will reboot again from the floppy. And we're going to select our USB mode. Let's see what happens. Alright, so scanning USB devices. It found a USB device. There we go, ASCII device. Asus SDRW, that is my DVD burner. Here the Panasonic USB CD.sys file loads the Asus DVD drive. DOS finishes booting. There's MSCDEX. We've got drive letter E assigned to our CD drive. And would you look at this? The green light on the USB CD is blinking and it's reading, and there is Windows 98. there is our Windows 98 setup CD, accessible in MS-DOS from a USB CD-ROM drive using just a couple files we found on the internet. Isn't that wonderful? To successfully install Windows 98, we're going to need to copy these files to the hard drive. So the hard drive needs to be formatted and ready to go at this step. I have attempted installing it directly from the CD-ROM, and it does work. Everything will copy to the hard drive just fine. The installer gets through the entire process, reading from the CD-ROM over USB in DOS mode like this without any problems. The issue you're going to have is that on the second or third reboot in the installation process, Windows 98 is going to try to install drivers for your devices and is going to expect to be able to read those off of the CD-ROM. Windows 98 isn't natively going to be able to read from the CD-ROM over USB. I have done some experiments with editing the config.sys and autoexec.bat for Windows 98 before that second reboot in the installation process to try and load these DOS mode drivers for the CD ahead of time. Unfortunately, not had much luck with that. Windows 98 can be very hit and miss. It was not really designed to use DOS mode device drivers. Sometimes it works. I have had that work in the past. It does work just great for Windows 3.1 for the record, but not so much with Windows 98. So no big deal. Your best bet then is just going to be to copy the requisite files to your C drive. So I'm just going to go ahead and do them one by one here. I think I actually made a mistake and should have made the Win98 folder on the C drive first. And here it goes. Windows 98, I found out the hard way, will not install if you skip any of the disk checks. So don't hit exit. Unfortunately, in my case, I had no way of disabling this 160 gig drive without physically unplugging it, and I didn't feel like taking the computer apart tonight. So I have to wait here for about half an hour while it does a check disk on a 160 gig IDE drive. But you guys will just get the fast forward version. So here we go. I will go through the rest of the Windows 98 installation here just to show that it did work and that we have a functioning system. But yeah, I'm calling this a win. That is the entire Windows 98 SE system copied from a USB CD-ROM drive and installed onto a freshly formatted hard drive. No IDE CD drives necessary. All we had to do was get a couple files to the internet, a bootable DOS floppy, and a USB CD-ROM drive. Hopefully this is useful for some of you. I know that it's definitely saved me in the past, as I described earlier with my other machine. It's a pretty handy way to get files on and off of DOS machines. What I usually do is have a boot menu with various configurations. I know there's some example files of that on philscomputerlab.com as well. I just make my own boot entry that loads those USB drivers, so I only have to load them if I'm expecting to use them. Like I said, I've had good luck with mostly older models of flash drive. But flash drives, USB floppy drives, USB CD-ROM drives, USB hard drives, basically every class of USB generic disk, mass storage disk, I have gotten to work with MS-DOS using these USB ASCII drivers as provided. So I will maybe make another video documenting some more of the advanced usages of the USB drivers, as well as my LCARS utilities, which save you some time because I've got all the utilities bundled there for you. But this was a good first start, hopefully first of many retro computing videos to come on my channel. If you'd like to encourage me to make more, go ahead and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time.